Hi guys, welcome to your English for today. So yesterday we introduced you to our model text. So for the first time we saw the information text that we're going to be trying to use as a base for our own version. So we're going to start pulling apart, we're going to start boxing up and unpicking details from our model text. So this was our model text from yesterday. We talked about social hierarchies, commoners, the nobility in the upper classes, the slaves, and various features of life, particularly looking at how they organize themselves for battle and for fighting. So what we want to do today, I'm going to go through each section. I'm going to pick out some vocabulary with you and we're going to go through it. So I'm going to start off in our top right hand corner. So we'll have a read through it, write down some of the vocabulary that you don't understand, see if we've picked out some of the same ones, and if you haven't understood the vocabulary, could you find out what it is? So let's get started. The Saxon people didn't all have great lives. Wealthy or not, all of them had endured some hard times. Despite this, society was split into three categories. The Saxon nobility and upper classes, for example, kings, aldermen and thanes, who were like landlords. Next were all the commoners, who were the ceorls, who were a group consisting of farmers and craftsmen. Lastly, slaves, otherwise known as thralls, whose lives were hard and mostly miserable. Our social hierarchy. Overall, the social hierarchy in Anglo-Saxon England was regarded fair and created a perfect solution for the two main needs at the time. One was the organised workforce, whose duties were defined clearly by their stations. Secondly, an army, which could be constructed and taken to the field with minimal preparation. So have a read through this yourself. So if you need to, pause the video and pick out some of the vocabulary that you might not quite understand what it is. Once you've done that, press play and I'll take you through what I think you might not have understood, and we'll see how close we are. Pause now. Right, let's have a look at the ones that I picked out. Endured. So if you endured something, it's to suffer patiently, and it's quite often the thing that you're suffering is painful or difficult. So enduring hard times means you suffer through them, you get on with your life, you keep going, you keep pushing through. Our next one, nobility. The group of people belonging to the highest social class in a country. So these are the people that everybody in theory looks up to because they're the best, they're at the top of their society. So we've got hierarchy as well. A system in which members of an organization or society are ranked according to relative status or authority. So if we look at our school, we have our hierarchy. We have Mrs. Bowen at the top, and then you have Miss Shaw underneath. So we have our organization of teachers. So the most senior one will be at the top of that hierarchy and then growing gradually down in levels of seniority. Moving on to our next part, we talk about the commoners. Commoners in the Anglo-Saxon period, known as ceorls, were the craftsmen and farmers. These were the majority of people. While some were successful landowners, there were some that were not that wealthy, living as agricultural labourers under their landlord's rights. Although all were craftsmen and farmers, they could all be summoned to join the Frid. If they were called, they were required by law to join. The Frid was an army of poorly armed fighters who had not undergone any training at all. The commoners could not afford their own weapons and armour, which meant their chances in a fight were not great. The best weapons they were able to acquire were spears, but most were only armed with hammers, axes and scythes, which were easily accessible through their work. So if you've looked at our history lesson for today as well, we talk about this, how weapons and tools were quite often one and the same thing. So we'll do the same again. Have a look through this, pick out the vocabulary that you might not understand, and then I'll show you what I've thought. Pause the video here. Right, let's have a look. What did I pick out? Agricultural. So it's related to farming, quite simply. Acquire. So it's to buy or obtain an object for yourself or oneself. So by acquiring a spear, you get a spear by either you buy it or you trade for it, or in some cases you steal it, which I don't recommend that you do if you want to have something. Accessible means that they're able to get to easily, so easily obtained or used. So if you think about what I've said about tools and weapons, they're quite often interchangeable things. If you've got a big knife that you use as maybe you work as a butcher processing the animals for meat, you have a big knife, you're going to take that to use. If you work in the forest, you're going to have an axe, you're going to take that to use. So things that are easily available. We move on to our nobility and upper class. The Anglo-Saxon upper class and nobility consisted of the kings, ealdormen, and thanes. The nobility was led by the kings who ruled over large areas of lands called kingdoms. Next were the ealdormen who controlled the various districts on behalf of the ruler. The ealdormen had significant power that was often responsible for law and order, therefore were tasked with providing justice. They were also in charge of the militias, which was formed by locals, the commoners, in times of war. Below the ealdormen were the thanes. The thanes were the professional military in service to either the king or the ealdormen. Some served the king and had the possibility to gain a place in the king's home, while others owned lands in their own rights. These thanes had the duty to create a solid foundation for the army and to fight for the kingdom. When they were not actively on duty in the military, they took care of local organizations of both men-at-arms and the trade routes. So they were there providing security and safety as well as a fighting force. Have a read through this for yourself. Pick out any vocabulary that you think, I don't really understand that. Make a list, and then we'll compare what we've got. Pause here. Okay, so this is what I thought we might pick up on. Districts. So it's an area of a country or a city. So we have an area which is the umbrella term Slough. Langley is a part of that, so it's an area of that city. So it's how things are split up. Professional, so a person competent or skilled in a particular activity. Well, professionals are quite often paid for what they do as well. So if you think about a professional footballer, they're paid to play football. The same for a professional cricketer. They're very, very skilled at what they do, and as a result, they get paid for doing it. So the thanes in this example were quite often paid by the ealdormen for being fighters. Organization, so it's an organized group of people with a particular purpose. So organizing men-at-arms, so organizing a fighting force, that would be their job, that would be their organization they would be responsible for. Our final part of our model text, we talked about slaves. So the bottom of the structure of society in Anglo-Saxon times consisted of the slaves, who were called bondsmen or thralls. Slaves were either prisoners captured during wars, Britons, natives from Great Britain, or Saxons falling into debt who literally had to sell themselves to slavery. They did not have many rights under the law, and they could be harshly punished without any thought of justice. Punishment, which includes being killed, was easy to receive for slaves. So we're going to do the same again. Have a read through, pick out any words you don't understand, and then we'll come back together. Pause the video here. Okay, let's have a look. What did we find? So society, the community of people living in a particular country or region and having shared customs, laws, and organizations. So a society is how people live together as part of the community. Punishment, the infliction or imposition of a penalty as retribution for an offense. That's quite a wordy way of describing it. So a punishment is what is the consequence. It's what happens as a result of you doing something that was wrong. So in the case of the slaves, if you stole something, you could end up being killed, because that would be the punishment or retribution for that offense. Okay, we've gone through the model text again. We've picked over some of the vocabulary. You might have found some of your own. So what I want you to try and do is write some sentences using the key vocabulary from our model text. How many could you use in one sentence? And make sure that the sentence still makes sense. Can you use parentheses? So you might need to go back into last week's videos and have a look, because we touched on parentheses last week. If you haven't got all the vocabulary that we've discussed, rewind the video, write it down, make sure you understand what the meanings are, and have a go at putting it into sentences. If you can get 2 or 3 of our key vocabulary words into a sentence, that would be amazing. Good luck. I look forward to seeing your work on Tapestry. Take care and stay safe.